The story of the prophet Jeremiah is much more than just another biblical narrative. It's a true portrait of perseverance, unshakable faith, and the courage to face rejection for a higher truth. Maybe you've heard of prophets before, but what makes Jeremiah so different? He lived during a time of chaos when the future of the nation was hanging by a thread, and his message wasn't exactly popular. And let's be honest, it's not easy being the bearer of bad news, is it? But Jeremiah didn't back down. He cried, wrestled with internal doubts, and was rejected countless times. And why? Because he believed in something far greater than himself. Now, think about that for a moment. How many times have you felt like you were swimming against the current, like no one truly understood the importance of what you were trying to do? Jeremiah experienced that on a much larger scale, and yet, he stayed true to his purpose. Does that sound familiar? How many times have you followed your intuition or what you knew was right, only to be ignored or even ridiculed? Jeremiah shows us that even the loneliest voices can have the deepest impact. Maybe not immediately, but over time. Have you ever stopped to think about what it really means to have faith, even when everything seems to be falling apart around you? Jeremiah teaches us that in every chapter of his life. It's not a story of easy victory, but of perseverance in the face of the impossible. Want to know how this can apply to your life today? Keep following along, and you'll see that the lessons from Jeremiah are more alive than ever. Get ready, because what comes next might completely change your perspective. Jeremiah's journey started long before he even realized it. Imagine being set apart for a divine purpose before you're born. How incredible is that? This is exactly what happened to Jeremiah. Born in Anathoth, a small town near Jerusalem, he was destined for greatness. But, as with many of us, the call wasn't something he sought out. It came to him. God had already marked him for a special mission, and Jeremiah's life would soon change when he began his ministry during King Josiah's reign. You see, this wasn't just a job or a role. It was a life of service. The same way you might feel called to something, but are unsure how to take that first step. Sometimes, it's the journey that reveals the calling. Jeremiah's early days as a prophet were marked by his youth and hesitation. He didn't feel qualified. Sound familiar? Many of us face moments where we feel unprepared or not good enough for the tasks ahead. But God assured Jeremiah that he was not too young, not too inexperienced, and certainly not alone. That's something to take to heart, isn't it? When faced with big decisions or daunting paths, it's easy to doubt. But like Jeremiah, we have to trust that sometimes our calling is bigger than our fears. Maybe you're thinking about a challenge in your life right now that feels overwhelming. This could be your moment to embrace it, just like Jeremiah did. What's remarkable about Jeremiah's early calling is the deep sense of purpose that came with it. He wasn't just speaking empty words. He was delivering a message that would shape history. Think about the power of that. And here's the thing. Each of us in our own lives is also called to something that could impact others. Maybe it's through your career, or perhaps it's in your family or community. The key takeaway from Jeremiah's story is that, no matter how small you feel, the ripple effect of your actions can be profound. So, what's stopping you from stepping into your calling? Jeremiah's prophetic mission spanned over 40 years, an entire lifetime of dedication. Imagine being tasked with delivering difficult truths for such a long period of time. This was no easy role, especially because his messages weren't exactly what people wanted to hear. He wasn't offering comfort or ease, but rather warnings and calls for repentance. In a way, it's similar to how sometimes the truth is hard to swallow, but it's necessary. Think about moments when you've had to confront uncomfortable realities in your own life. Like Jeremiah, the weight of delivering that truth can feel isolating, but it's often what leads to growth and change. What made Jeremiah stand out wasn't just his longevity, but the emotional depth he brought to his ministry. Known as the weeping prophet, his tears weren't a sign of weakness, but of passion and empathy. Can you imagine caring so deeply for others that their struggles move you to tears? This is what set Jeremiah apart. He wasn't detached from the people he spoke to. His heart was tied to their fate, and that's a lesson we can all carry. Whether it's in our work, relationships, or personal growth, caring deeply is a strength, not a weakness. Throughout his time, Jeremiah watched 5 kings rise and fall. Each ruler brought new challenges and circumstances, but Jeremiah's message remained consistent. It reminds me of how, in life, We often face changing environments, different bosses, leadership styles, or societal shifts. Yet, like Jeremiah, staying true to your core values, even when everything around you changes, is what builds resilience. If you think about it, those who stand firm in their convictions, regardless of external pressures, often become the ones people turn to for guidance. Jeremiah's role was far from glamorous. He faced opposition, mockery, and even threats to his life. But he persevered. This persistence teaches us a valuable lesson. The path to fulfilling a mission or purpose is rarely smooth. In fact, it's often riddled with challenges. But here's the thing. Just because something is difficult doesn't mean it's not worth doing. Consider the moments in your life when you faced setbacks. What kept you going? Jeremiah's story is a reminder that perseverance, especially when the odds seem stacked against you, is what separates those who succeed from those who quit. One of the most human aspects of Jeremiah's mission was his feeling of isolation. Can you imagine pouring your heart into something only to feel like no one is listening? It's easy to relate, isn't it? We've all had moments when it feels like our efforts are going unnoticed, like no one understands what we're trying to achieve. But, as Jeremiah shows, even when it feels like you're alone, your work has value. The impact you're making might not be visible right away, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Jeremiah's mission wasn't just about delivering warnings. It was about giving people a chance to change. It's a reminder that, even in the darkest times, there's always an opportunity for redemption. This is a message that transcends time. In today's world, where it's easy to feel overwhelmed by negativity, the idea that change is always possible is incredibly powerful. So, if you're facing a difficult situation, remember, it's never too late to make a shift. Just like the people of Judah had the chance to turn things around, so do you. Lastly, what's truly inspiring about Jeremiah's role is that he never lost hope, even when it seemed like the people would never listen. It's a reminder to hold on to hope, even when the odds aren't in your favor. Jeremiah's story is one of endurance, faith, and unwavering commitment to his mission. And isn't that something we all aspire to? To stay dedicated to our purpose, even when the road gets tough. So, what's the next step you need to take to stay on your path? Jeremiah's prophetic ministry unfolded during one of the most turbulent times in Judah's history. The rise of Babylon as a global power was shaking the very foundations of nations, and Judah was caught in the crossfire. Imagine living in a time when the fate of your country was hanging by a thread, knowing that destruction was looming, but still hoping for a miracle. Jeremiah was in the middle of all this, watching his warnings about Babylon come true. It's not so different from today, when we can see warning signs all around us, whether it's in politics, the environment, or personal circumstances. The question is, do we pay attention to those warnings? During these last days of the kingdom of Judah, Jeremiah's voice was one of the few that remained steadfast. While others were scrambling, trying to figure out how to avoid disaster, Jeremiah stood firm in his message. He wasn't swayed by the fear or panic around him. Think about that for a moment. How often do we find ourselves influenced by the opinions and emotions of others? Jeremiah's story challenges us to stand our ground, especially when we know what we believe to be true. It's not easy, but as Jeremiah shows, it's necessary. The fall of Jerusalem wasn't just a political or military defeat, it was a spiritual one. Jeremiah had spent years warning the people about the consequences of turning away from God, and now, those warnings were becoming reality. It's a sobering reminder that our actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences take time to manifest. Just like in life, when we make choices, whether good or bad, they often set off a chain of events that we can't always see right away. Jeremiah's story urges us to consider the long-term impact of our decisions. Jeremiah's prophecies were not just about the immediate threat of Babylon. They carried a much deeper message. He wasn't simply predicting the destruction of Jerusalem. He was calling for a return to faithfulness, to the core values that the people had abandoned. This raises an important question for us today. What are the values we've let slip away? In the midst of our busy lives, it's easy to lose sight of what's most important. Jeremiah's story reminds us to pause and reflect. What is it that we need to return to? The destruction of Jerusalem wasn't the end of Jeremiah's message, though. In fact, it was just the beginning of a new chapter. After the fall, Jeremiah's role shifted from warning to guiding. It's similar to how, after a failure or setback in life, we often have the opportunity to pivot and take on a new role. Jeremiah's resilience in the face of such devastation shows us that even when things fall apart, there's always a way to move forward. It's not about avoiding failure. It's about how you respond to it. As the Babylonians took over, many in Judah were forced into exile, and this became a pivotal moment in the story of Jeremiah. He had predicted this very outcome, but now he had to live through it alongside the people. This is another profound aspect of Jeremiah's life. He wasn't just a distant observer. He was right there in the thick of it. It's like when leaders today have to face the same challenges as those they lead. Jeremiah's presence during the exile shows that true leadership is about walking through the fire with those you're guiding, not just standing on the sidelines. Lastly, the rise of Babylon and the destruction of Jerusalem also fulfilled one of the central themes of Jeremiah's prophecies, that ignoring the divine path comes at a cost. This isn't just a story from thousands of years ago. It's a timeless truth. In today's world, it's easy to get caught up in the distractions and forget what really matters. Jeremiah's historical context reminds us that when we lose our way, the consequences can be devastating. But at the same time, it's a call to action. How can we course correct before it's too late? Jeremiah wasn't just a prophet to Judah. His message extended beyond borders, speaking to nations far and wide. It's fascinating to think about how a single voice, in such a turbulent time, could address not only his own people but the entire region. His prophecies were directed toward Israel, Egypt, Babylon, and many other nations, showing that his warnings were universal. This reminds us of how interconnected we are, even today. One nation's choices, whether good or bad, ripple across the globe. In your own life, have you ever noticed how your decisions impact those around you, even beyond your immediate circle? The heart of Jeremiah's message to these nations wasn't just about political upheaval, it was about moral decay. He warned them that turning away from God's principles would lead to their downfall. It's a message that still resonates today. How often do we see moral degradation in society, only to witness its consequences later? Think about the scandals, corruption, and greed that dominate headlines. Jeremiah's warnings to the nations serve as a reminder that when we stray too far from core values, the results are inevitable. It's not just about individual consequences. It's about the collective fate of a community, a country, or even the world. Jeremiah's prophecies carried a sense of urgency, but they also carried hope. Even though he warned nations of their impending doom, he also spoke of redemption if they turned back to God. It's a message of second chances, something we all need at various points in our lives. Have you ever found yourself on the wrong path but realized it before it was too late? Jeremiah's story teaches us that no matter how far we've strayed, there's always an opportunity to turn things around. The key is to recognize the need for change before the consequences become irreversible. When Jeremiah spoke to the nations, he wasn't just addressing political leaders. He was speaking to the hearts of the people. This is significant because true change doesn't come from the top down. It comes from within. Think about it. How many times have we seen attempts at reform fail because they didn't address the underlying moral or ethical issues? Jeremiah's message was clear. Real transformation happens when individuals, not just institutions, take responsibility for their actions. This is something we can all apply in our own lives. Change starts with us, in our homes, workplaces, and communities. One of the powerful elements of Jeremiah's message to the nations is the concept of accountability. He didn't sugarcoat the truth, and he didn't offer easy fixes. The nations were held accountable for their actions, and so are we. In today's world, where excuses and deflections are common, Jeremiah's straightforward approach is refreshing. It's a reminder that, at the end of the day, we are responsible for our choices. Whether it's in our relationships, careers, or personal growth, there's no escaping the fact that we reap what we sow. Jeremiah's words challenge us to reflect on what seeds we're planting today. Jeremiah's broader message also speaks to the idea of unity and shared destiny. The nations he addressed were not isolated. Their fates were intertwined. In a way, it's similar to how we live today, in a world where the actions of one country, company, or individual can affect millions. Think about global crises, economic collapses, pandemics, environmental disasters. Jeremiah's message is a reminder that no one exists in a vacuum. Our decisions, both individually and collectively, have far-reaching consequences. It's a call to think not just about ourselves, but about the larger impact we have on the world. Lastly, Jeremiah's message to the nations included a profound element of justice. He spoke out against oppression, exploitation, and the abuse of power. This wasn't just a spiritual or moral message, it was a call for social justice. In many ways, Jeremiah was ahead of his time, advocating for fairness and equity long before these concepts became mainstream. His words remind us that the pursuit of justice is a timeless value. Whether it's in ancient times or the modern world, the fight against injustice is ongoing, and Jeremiah's voice echoes through the ages, calling us to stand up for what's right. Jeremiah's analogy of the potter and the clay is one of the most memorable images from his prophecies. Picture a potter sitting at their wheel, shaping a lump of clay into something beautiful. This is how Jeremiah described God's relationship with humanity. Just as the potter has control over the clay, molding it and reshaping it as needed, so does God have the power to shape our lives. This idea can be both comforting and challenging. It suggests that we're not fixed. We can change, grow, and be reshaped. But it also means surrendering to a greater power, trusting that the hands shaping us know what they're doing. The beauty of the potter's wheel is that it allows for constant revision. If the clay doesn't turn out as intended, the potter doesn't throw it away, they reshape it. This speaks volumes about the concept of second chances in life. How often do we feel like we've messed up beyond repair? But the story of the potter and the clay reminds us that, in God's hands, there's always room for redemption. No matter how far we think we've strayed or how flawed we believe we are, there's always the possibility of being reshaped into something new. Jeremiah's message here is one of hope. Even when Judah was on the brink of destruction, he reminded them that God had the power to rebuild. It's easy to feel like certain situations are beyond saving, whether it's a relationship, a career, or even personal faith. But just as the potter can start over with the same clay, God can take the broken pieces of our lives and create something beautiful. It's a lesson in patience, too. Sometimes, the reshaping process takes time, and it's not always comfortable. But the end result is worth the wait. One of the most profound aspects of the potter and clay metaphor is the idea of submission. The clay doesn't resist the potter's hands, it yields to them. In the same way, we are called to submit to God's will, even when it doesn't make sense to us. Think about times in your life when things didn't go as planned. It's easy to feel frustrated or discouraged, but often, it's in those moments that we're being reshaped for something greater. Jeremiah's analogy encourages us to trust the process, even when we can't see the bigger picture. The potter's hands are gentle, but they are also purposeful. Every movement has a reason, even if the clay doesn't understand it. This is a reminder that God's guidance in our lives is intentional. There are no wasted moments, no meaningless struggles. Every twist and turn is part of the shaping process. And while we may not understand it in the moment, there's always a purpose behind the shaping. This perspective can bring peace in times of uncertainty, knowing that we're in the hands of a master craftsman. What's fascinating about the potter and clay metaphor is that it's not just about individual transformation. It's about collective transformation. Jeremiah wasn't just speaking to individuals. He was speaking to the entire nation of Judah. In the same way, the analogy applies to communities, nations, and even the world. Just as individuals can be reshaped, so can societies. The question is, are we willing to be molded into something better? Are we, as a society, ready to submit to the hands that can reshape us for the greater good? Lastly, the potter and clay analogy is a call to humility. The clay has no power on its own. It's the potter who brings it to life. This reminds us of our dependence on God's guidance. In a world that often values self-reliance and independence, Jeremiah's message is countercultural. It calls us to recognize that we are not the masters of our own destiny. Instead, we are clay, being shaped by a power far greater than ourselves. And in that realization, there is freedom. Freedom to let go of control and trust in the process. Jeremiah's prophecy of the New Covenant is one of the most profound messages in the entire Bible. He spoke of a time when God would establish a new relationship with his people, one that went beyond rules and rituals, reaching directly into their hearts. This was a revolutionary idea at the time. Imagine being part of a culture that was so rooted in laws and traditions, only to hear that something deeper, more personal, was coming. Jeremiah's words would have sparked curiosity and even hope among those who longed for a closer connection with God. It's a reminder that true transformation begins within, not through external actions alone. This new covenant, as Jeremiah described, was a promise of renewal. God would no longer write his laws on stone tablets, but on the hearts of his people. This symbolizes a shift from external adherence to internal conviction. Think about the difference between following a rule because you have to and following it because you truly believe in it. That's what Jeremiah was pointing toward. A faith that was not just about doing the right thing but about being the right kind of person. It's a message that resonates even today, where we often struggle with authenticity in our actions. What's fascinating about this prophecy is the personal nature of it. Jeremiah spoke of a relationship with God that was intimate and direct. No longer would there be intermediaries or barriers. Each person would know God personally. It's a radical shift from the old way of thinking, where priests and rituals were the primary way to connect with the divine. Today, this prophecy speaks to the idea of personal spirituality, where your relationship with God isn't dependent on institutions but is a direct, heart-to-heart connection. It's a challenge to look inward and ask, how personal is my faith? Jeremiah's vision of the new covenant wasn't just about a new way of relating to God, it was also about redemption. He foretold a time when God would forgive the sins of his people and remember them no more. This message of forgiveness is incredibly powerful. Think about the weight of guilt or shame that people carry, sometimes for years. Jeremiah's prophecy is a reminder that, no matter how far we've strayed, forgiveness is always possible. It's a message of hope that still speaks to us today, offering the chance for a fresh start. The New Covenant prophecy also hints at the coming of the Messiah, who would be the ultimate fulfillment of this promise. Jeremiah's words laid the foundation for the arrival of Jesus, who would bring peace and redemption to the world. This connection between Jeremiah's prophecy and the life of Jesus shows how the Bible's stories are deeply intertwined. Each part builds on the next, creating a larger narrative of salvation and hope. For anyone studying biblical history, this moment is key in understanding the continuity between the Old and New Testaments. One of the most interesting aspects of this prophecy is how it challenges traditional notions of power. In Jeremiah's time, power was often seen in terms of control and dominance, whether through kings, armies, or religious authorities. But the New Covenant wasn't about external power. It was about the transformative power of love and forgiveness. It's a lesson that's still relevant today. In a world that often equates power with control, Jeremiah's prophecy reminds us that true strength lies in the ability to forgive, to love, and to change from within. Finally, Jeremiah's prophecy of the New Covenant is a message of inclusivity. He wasn't just speaking to a select few. This new relationship with God would be available to all. It's a message of equality and access, where every person, regardless of status or background, could know God personally. This is a powerful idea in today's world, where divisions and barriers often separate people. Jeremiah's words remind us that, in the eyes of God, we are all equal, and the opportunity for a personal relationship with him is open to everyone. Jeremiah's life was marked by immense struggles, both personal and public. Despite being called by God for a divine purpose, his path was anything but easy. Imagine being given a mission, knowing it is vital, and yet being met with constant rejection, ridicule, and even threats. That's the reality Jeremiah faced for much of his ministry. It's a powerful reminder that even when we are on the right path, adversity is inevitable. Like Jeremiah, we may face resistance in our own lives when we try to stand up for what we believe in. The question is, how do we persevere when the odds seem against us? One of the most striking aspects of Jeremiah's story is his emotional vulnerability. He is often referred to as the weeping prophet because of the deep sorrow he felt for his people. Can you imagine caring so much for others that their pain becomes your own? Jeremiah's tears weren't a sign of weakness. They were a testament to his compassion and his commitment to his calling. In today's world, where showing emotion is sometimes seen as a weakness, Jeremiah's vulnerability is a reminder that true strength comes from empathy and the willingness to feel deeply. Jeremiah's struggles didn't just come from external forces. He also wrestled with doubt and despair. There were moments when he questioned his purpose, when the weight of his mission felt too heavy to bear. Sound familiar? Many of us experience times when we doubt our own path, when the challenges we face make us question whether we're truly making a difference. Jeremiah's story shows us that doubt is a natural part of the journey. It doesn't mean we're on the wrong path. It simply means we're human. And like Jeremiah, we must learn to push through those moments of doubt, trusting that there is a greater purpose behind the struggles. One of the key themes in Jeremiah's story is the importance of persistence. Despite the overwhelming challenges he faced, he never gave up. He continued to deliver God's message, even when no one wanted to listen. This level of perseverance is something we can all aspire to. How often do we give up when things get tough? Jeremiah's story reminds us that persistence is often the key to success, even when the results aren't immediately visible. It's about staying the course, trusting that the seeds we plant today will bear fruit in the future. Jeremiah's perseverance was not without cost. He endured isolation, imprisonment, and intense suffering because of his message. But through it all, he remained steadfast. This speaks to the power of conviction. When you truly believe in something, you are willing to endure hardships for it. In our own lives, there will be times when standing up for what we believe in will come with challenges. But Jeremiah's story teaches us that the cost of giving up is often greater than the cost of pushing through. What is it that you believe in so deeply that you're willing to fight for it, even when the road gets tough? Another powerful lesson from Jeremiah's struggles is the idea of faith in the unseen. Throughout his ministry, he was often delivering messages about events that had not yet come to pass. It took tremendous faith to continue speaking truth when the outcomes were still uncertain. This is something we can all relate to. Having faith in a process, a dream, or a goal, even when we can't see the results yet. Jeremiah's life reminds us that faith isn't about knowing the outcome. It's about trusting the process, even when the future is unclear. Lastly, Jeremiah's perseverance offers a profound lesson in resilience. Despite everything he endured, he never lost sight of his mission. His resilience wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. In a world where it's easy to feel overwhelmed by life's challenges, Jeremiah's story is a reminder that resilience is not about avoiding hardship, it's about bouncing back from it. It's about finding the strength to continue, even when everything around you seems to be falling apart. Jeremiah's life challenges us to build that same resilience in our own lives, trusting that, like him, we can persevere through anything. Jeremiah's legacy is one of profound influence, not just during his time but for generations to come. His words, once met with resistance and scorn, have become timeless reminders of faith, perseverance, and the importance of listening to divine guidance. It's incredible to think about how a man who was often dismissed in his own time would go on to shape the spiritual lives of countless people throughout history. In many ways, Jeremiah's life teaches us that true impact isn't always immediate. Sometimes, the seeds we plant today don't bear fruit until long after we're gone. It makes you wonder, what kind of legacy are you building in your own life? One of the key aspects of Jeremiah's influence is the way his prophecies laid the groundwork for the understanding of future events, particularly the exile and eventual return of the Israelites. His words gave people context for the struggles they faced, offering both warnings and hope. Think about how powerful that is, to provide a narrative that helps people make sense of their suffering. In a world where we often struggle to understand the why behind difficult circumstances, Jeremiah's legacy reminds us of the importance of perspective. Sometimes, understanding the bigger picture can give us the strength to endure the challenges we face. Jeremiah's influence didn't just stop with the Israelites. His prophecies about the coming of a Messiah and the new covenant resonated far beyond his immediate audience. In fact, his messages are often seen as a precursor to the teachings of Jesus Christ. The idea that a prophet's words could echo so strongly through time, shaping the foundations of Christianity, is a testament to the power of truth. Jeremiah's story challenges us to think about the long-term impact of our own words and actions. How often do we consider the ripple effects of what we say and do today? Another important element of Jeremiah's legacy is the way he modeled a life of unwavering faith in the face of adversity. Even though he struggled with doubt, fear, and rejection, he never turned away from his mission. This is something we can all learn from, how to remain committed to our purpose, even when the world seems to be against us. Jeremiah's life shows us that faith isn't just about believing when things are going well. It's about holding on when everything seems to be falling apart. His legacy challenges us to build a faith that can withstand the storms of life. Jeremiah's story also highlights the importance of emotional resilience. Known as the weeping prophet, he wasn't afraid to show his vulnerability. This emotional depth gave his message even more power. In today's world, where vulnerability is often seen as a weakness, Jeremiah's life reminds us that there is strength in allowing ourselves to feel deeply. His legacy teaches us that true leadership and influence come from being authentic and open about our emotions. It's a reminder that we don't have to have it all together all the time. Sometimes, it's in our moments of vulnerability that we make the biggest impact. Jeremiah's influence can also be seen in the way his prophecies continue to inspire hope. His messages about the new covenant and the coming Messiah offered a glimpse of redemption and restoration, even in the darkest times. This idea of hope in the midst of despair is something that resonates across all generations. No matter how difficult life becomes, Jeremiah's legacy reminds us that there is always the possibility of renewal and change. It's a powerful message that continues to inspire people today, offering comfort and reassurance in the face of uncertainty. Lastly, Jeremiah's legacy challenges us to think about the mark we want to leave on the world. His life wasn't easy, and his mission was often thankless, but his impact is undeniable. In a world that often prioritizes immediate results and recognition, Jeremiah's story is a reminder that true influence isn't always about fame or success. It's about staying true to your purpose, even when no one is watching. His legacy encourages us to focus on the long-term impact of our actions and to trust that, even if we don't see the results right away, our work will matter in the end. The final days of Jeremiah's life were as complex and challenging as the rest of his ministry. After spending decades warning his people about the consequences of turning away from God, Jeremiah witnessed the very destruction he had predicted. Jerusalem fell, and the Babylonians took many into exile. Yet, despite everything crumbling around him, Jeremiah remained steadfast in his faith. It's a remarkable testament to his resilience. Imagine watching everything you fought for seemingly collapse, yet holding on to the belief that there is still a greater plan in motion. Jeremiah's life teaches us that even in the darkest times, faith can be an anchor. What's particularly striking about Jeremiah's final days is that he chose to remain with the people left behind in Judah, rather than escaping to Babylon or another place of safety. This decision highlights his deep commitment to his calling. He wasn't in it for personal gain or comfort. He was there to guide and serve, even when the situation seemed hopeless. It's a powerful lesson in leadership and sacrifice. In our own lives, we're often faced with the choice between doing what's easy and doing what's right. Jeremiah's choice reminds us that true leadership is about staying with your people, even when the path is difficult. In the midst of the chaos and destruction, Jeremiah continued to deliver God's messages, even though most people had stopped listening. It's hard to imagine the level of perseverance that requires. Yet, Jeremiah never wavered in his mission. This teaches us an important lesson about staying true to our purpose, even when it feels like no one is paying attention. There will be times in life when your efforts go unnoticed or unappreciated, but that doesn't mean they don't matter. Jeremiah's final days show us that what's important is remaining faithful to your mission, regardless of external validation. Jeremiah's relationship with the remaining people of Judah became more complex during these final days. Despite his warnings, many of them still turned to him for guidance, especially when they faced the decision of whether to flee to Egypt for safety. Jeremiah advised them to stay in Judah, warning that fleeing would lead to disaster. But, as it happened many times before, the people ignored his advice and chose their own path. This situation is relatable for many of us. How often do we find ourselves giving sound advice, only to be ignored? Jeremiah's patience in the face of repeated rejection is a reminder that, while we can't control others' actions, we can always remain steadfast in delivering the truth. What's poignant about Jeremiah's final days is the sense of isolation he experienced. After years of being God's mouthpiece, he was left with a small, defeated remnant of his people, many of whom still didn't trust him. Yet, he remained. This speaks to a deeper truth about the cost of leadership and faithfulness. There are times when standing firm in your beliefs will leave you feeling alone, misunderstood, or even betrayed. But Jeremiah's story reminds us that solitude in the pursuit of truth is sometimes part of the journey. It's in those moments of isolation that our character is truly tested. As Jeremiah neared the end of his life, his message never changed. Even after witnessing the destruction of everything he had known, he continued to speak about the hope and renewal that God had promised. This unwavering focus on redemption is what makes Jeremiah's story so powerful. It's easy to lose hope when the world around us is falling apart, but Jeremiah's life teaches us that hope isn't about circumstances. It's about faith in something greater. His final days remind us that no matter how bleak things may seem, the promise of renewal is always on the horizon. Finally, Jeremiah's story leaves us with a question. What will our final days look like? Will we be able to say that we remained true to our purpose, even when the road was difficult? Jeremiah's legacy is one of perseverance, faith, and commitment to something far greater than himself. His life challenges us to think about our own legacy, how we want to be remembered, and what mark we want to leave on the world. It's a powerful reflection as we close the chapter on his story. As you reflect on the life and legacy of Jeremiah, it's clear that his story isn't just a historical account, it's a call to action. Jeremiah showed us what it means to stand firm in the face of adversity, to trust in a greater plan even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. The question is, how will you apply these lessons in your own life? Are you willing to persevere, to stay true to your purpose, even when the path is tough? Jeremiah's life reminds us that faith is more than belief. It's a way of living, a commitment to walking a difficult road with unwavering conviction. Think about the challenges you're facing right now. Maybe there's a situation in your life where you feel isolated or misunderstood, just like Jeremiah did. Or perhaps you're standing at a crossroads, unsure of the next step to take. Jeremiah's story teaches us that even in moments of uncertainty, there is always hope. It's not about knowing the outcome, it's about trusting the journey. So, what steps can you take today to align your actions with the purpose you've been called to? How can you, like Jeremiah, be a voice for truth, even when no one is listening? Now, more than ever, the world needs people who are willing to stand up for what's right, to persevere in the face of difficulty, and to trust in a higher purpose. Jeremiah's legacy challenges us to be those people. So, are you ready to take that step? Are you ready to embrace your calling, whatever it may be, and make an impact that will outlast you? It starts with a single decision: to stay the course, to trust the process, and to believe in the power of faith to transform your life. If you found value in this journey through the story of Jeremiah, don't stop here. There's so much more to learn, and you don't have to do it alone. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you can continue exploring these powerful biblical stories and how they apply to your life today. Remember, change doesn't happen overnight, but with each lesson, each step, you're building a legacy of faith, just like Jeremiah did.